So you've been out in the desert testing. Can't do this race right away. This is such a fun season. It's just been so good and surprising. It's like when you go to Costco and they got all the good free samples, It's like that. I mean, not quite Christmas, but it's like Costco free samples. That's what this season is. All right, son, you ready to go?
I am ready to go.
Welcome to Hard Compound, an American take on Formula One. This episode is soon after the Belgian Grand Prix. Son, I had predicted chaos. You thought rain. But this was chaotic, but in an even better way. I mean, it's the rare race where I think what happened after the race was so much more important. George with the disqualification, a rare Mercedes screw-up. I mean, he just drove the heck out of that car and then was punished for it. Oh, that's got to be tough. But Lewis gets another win. So, I did not know this at the time, but I saw this was first time in F1 history that all 10 drivers, the top 10, were previous winners. Even had George not been disqualified, it still would have worked out that way. So it's pretty cool. All right, son, give me your take on the Belgian Grand Prix and all the things as we head into the summer break.
Yeah, I mean, seemed like all of the drivers were channeling their inner Greta Thunberg, whatever her name is, that little Swedish girl, that climate activist. I mean, they were conserving the heck out of their tires, out of their fuel, just trying to extend as much as they could. Russell, unfortunate disqualification. I think, Mercedes said, it was because the tires didn't have enough, tread left on them or whatever. So he was underweight by a kilo or something like that. I'm not sure I believe exactly that story, but, unfortunately disqualified. They lose the 1-2 finish, but at the very least, Hamilton takes that top step on the podium. So all things considered, not a terrible weekend for Mercedes. This was such an interesting race. We had so many different battles, different sort of tire strategies, a little bit offset from each other. Teammates that really were sort of scrapping for the most that they could. And, we had where we typically get each of these top 4 teams, both drivers sort of battling each other almost. We got all of them displaced a little bit and battling other teams, right? We had Norris pretty consistently battling with Sainz and Verstappen. Piastri was scrapping with the 2 Mercedes. Leclerc even a little bit on his own, but fending off Max near the end. It was a lot of fun to watch. And then we got those mid-pack battles with Alonso and Ocon again. Somehow they always seem to end up battling each other. We got Ricciardo getting up there into that fight as well, into the top 10. The Williams and I think it was the Alpine of Gasly and Albon fighting, trying to get as close to the points as they could. I mean, this was fun all around. We had no safety cars, so pretty much everyone was trying to conserve fuel for essentially the entire race. I think everyone was praying to God that Logan would crash so that we would get a safety car. Good for him for not doing that. But Belgium seems to always deliver. It's a fun track. It's a long track. Historic. We got no rain, which seems unusual for this time of year in Belgium. But it ended up being a really fun race nonetheless.
It was. And, another great race to this great season. But, man, what heartbreak for George. I mean, to get that win, to just, like you said, there was no rain. There was no crashes. This was all about the drive. And no one drove, I thought, better than George. And then to have the victory taken away, because they said he was slightly underweight. That's a tough break. And George has had a few. I mean, he said the Mercedes is so reliable, but he said this They've had a couple poor pit stops. He's had at least one other, not disqualification, but, DNF. That's not his fault, at least. Tough. But that aside, Mercedes has now been on the podium, I think, the last 4. They've had winners the last 3, 4. 3 of the last 4.
Yeah, Hamilton's won 2 in a row.
Yeah. So, do you think Lewis is having regrets? Clearly, Mercedes, they haven't righted everything, but they're now challenging,
Yeah, Mercedes has been coming on strong. At the beginning of the season, right, we were looking at it and saying, oh, McLaren is doing pretty well, but it's Red Bull and Ferrari. And Mercedes was completely out of it. And the last maybe 6, 7 races, ever since, once they got back to Europe almost, it seemed like Mercedes kind of figured everything out, right? And so now it's looking like it's Mercedes and McLaren that are the 2 top dogs right now.
Yep.
And if they keep going at the same pace and they keep getting both drivers to have solid drives, because McLaren actually started out pretty well, McLaren is really, really close to Red Bull right now. Mercedes is coming on really strong. We still got quite a few races left. 10 races? Mercedes can definitely pop up in there too. So this is looking out to be a really exciting finish to the season.
This is, and I think when we started this season, we did not expect Red Bull to be as dominant. We did not expect Max to be as dominant as last year, but we thought they would be the top dog. But really what we've seen is, Max is there, but McLaren has really come on strong to where, like you said, they may now have the best car, best team. Mercedes looks like they've righted almost everything, and they may now be better. And it could be in the second half of the season, McLaren versus Mercedes, with Max there, in third, let's say, because he's not getting much help from his teammate. But this also, I think, shows the toughness of the length of this season. 24 races, I believe, are planned, 14 down before the summer break. And so you start to look at some of the things where it's like, oh man, Lando, some of his poor decisions that he's made, some of McLaren's screw ups. Even just in this race in Belgium, he had a very poor start, and that didn't cost him the race, but it really took him out, and those things, it's like, look, every little thing, I know it's a long season, over 20 races around the world, but every bit matters.
Yeah. And I think McLaren we've talked about this over the last few races, actually. McLaren has really sort of struggled to, I think, get in the winning mindset. Norris, had a tough start. He had an overall decent race, solid race, but a few minor mistakes here and there that ultimately led to him really not competing for a podium spot in this race. Then Oscar, I think, had an excellent race, great race, had like a 5-second pit stop, that second pit stop.
Yep.
I'll say he screwed up, missed his marks, so it led to a long pit stop, but he ended up 1 second off of the lead. You think if he had a typical pit stop, it's very possible he wins this race.
Right.
Instead he ends up third and promoted to second with the Russell disqualification. But, that could be back-to-back wins for Oscar if he just hits his marks on that pit stop. There's little mistakes that are happening in McLaren that I think will very possibly prevent them from either winning the Constructors or, Lando taking the Drivers' Championship, at least this year.
Right. Because we've seen so many opportunities for McLaren that they've missed. Like you said, that was one. Lando, just a poor and uncharacteristically bad start. But the whole team has made enough screw-ups to where, in the past 4 races, let's say the past month, or maybe go back, like you said, to Montreal, have they closed the gap? Not on the Drivers' Championship. They have not. Max is still far ahead, and they haven't closed the gap. Lando has not. Oscar has not. McLaren is creeping up, but I think time is running out. There's definitely opportunity for them to win the Constructors. There's still a chance Lewis could win the championship. I mean, these are unlikely, but the numbers are not crazy, which shows, I think, a lot of the issues that Red Bull is having. But man, if Max wins the championship this year, I mean, it's testament to his greatness. And if Red Bull wins this year, I think McLaren needs to do a lot of soul searching. Although, speaking of soul searching, we heard that Red Bull is going to retain Sergio Perez at least through this year. He has not done anything to deserve it. I mean, he's now 8th. Is this possible? Is he actually an 8th in the standings?
I think he's 7th, right?
7th. Okay.
I think Russell is behind him only because he was DQ'd from this race.
Okay. Yep.
Yes. Yeah. Russell's currently exactly 15 points behind Perez. He would have had 25 in this race.
Right. I mean, this is just, and in that car, I mean, to be an 8th or 7th, I don't know.
Yeah, it's tough. That's a tough one. I saw kind of a ridiculous stat, not really ridiculous, but some of Perez's stats from this season. There's been 14 races, right? He's got 2 DNFs. So, okay, he finishes 12 races. He's only has 7 points finishes this season.
Wow.
7 of 12 finishes were in the points. In that car, Max is leading the championship by 78 points.
Wow.
Like, that is not acceptable. Hulkenberg has 5 points finishes this season in a fucking Haas. Like, what is Sergio Perez doing?
Yeah, Nico's the dude. I've praised Nico for a decade now. He's the dude. He's just in poor cars. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, newer fans may not realize the ruthlessness of the driver seat there. The number 2 at Red Bull. Kvyat had a shot, gone. Ricciardo, gone. Gasly, gone. Albon, gone. They all had shots, but they're keeping Sergio. All I can think of is, I think there's 2 reasons for this. Number 1 is they're now at the point where any change is a bigger risk. Okay. They know Sergio can drive this car and they're hoping he can ride it. But Ricciardo, I think, has had too many ups and downs, too many personal issues. Liam Lawson, who's right there in the paddock, like, hey, guys, give me a shot. Remember, I said, this is a tough sport. It's unfair. He may be better than Sergio. He may never race in F1 again. He got a few shots last year. That was it. But maybe they're thinking, oh, he's a bigger risk. What if he crashes? I think there's no conspiracy here. It's not about sponsorship money. I think it's simply they've looked at all the data and said the risk is just a little bit less if we stick with Sergio. That's all I can think of.
Yeah, I mean, Sergio, frankly, is just not driving that car well enough. You think about it, and typically we have 4 top teams. So we should have 8 drivers pretty much competing for the top 8 spots. Sergio Perez is either consistently the 8th of those drivers or further down. He has very rarely been closer to the top of those 8 drivers, at least not since early on in the season, when Red Bull clearly had the best car at that point in time. So he needs to figure something out. I think as far as Red Bull is concerned, right, you don't want to make a change that will more negatively impact the team. There were or have been drivers that probably would get more out of that car than Perez has done so far this season. But it's also very possible that it sort of upsets the balance of that team, that it upsets Max. I almost think Toto kind of constantly saying, oh, Mercedes is trying to sign Max. Like, we've had all these conversations with Max, blah, blah, blah. It's almost like he is planting the seed that if Red Bull does anything to upset Max in any way, Mercedes will pounce on that and say, look, you can come here, be our number 1 guy, F George, we don't care about him. Like, just come to Mercedes. And I think maybe that's getting in Red Bull's head a little bit. Like, maybe they're like, you know what? We really don't want to do anything that will put off Max in any way. And that includes, going away from a driver that Max is clearly comfortable racing against.
Yep. I think there's a lot of validity to that. I think a counter to that, McLaren, they don't have a number one. Not anymore, I don't think. I mean, we're watching Alpine, a.k.a. Renault, implode. and McLaren have a young driver, Oscar Piastri, who was brought up through the Renault program, was slated to take over the seat there, said, no, thank you. And then went to McLaren. Everyone was shocked. But I mean, I think he's making the case, not quite, but I think he's making the case like, look, there's no number one at McLaren. There's two equals, me, Oscar Piastri, and Lando Norris. I still think Lando's better, but he's had a lot more time in that car, a lot more time with that team, a lot more experience. Oscar's looking good, though.
Yeah, he's been doing really, really well. Was sort of given that win in the previous race in Hungary. And I think he took a lot from that. And in this race, I think he was really, really solid, had a great qualifying session, raced really well, and was just competing with those Mercedes cars really alone. And there was nobody else that was all that close to Hamilton and Russell, except for Oscar. And like we said earlier, he had a real shot to win this race if that pit stop had gone well. I think he's just been doing so well. He started out a little bit on the back foot. Norris was just driving so well. And I think, Norris is still the guy, but you definitely can see that both of them are sort of vying for that top spot on the team. A little bit like at Ferrari, right? Where Leclerc and Sainz are kind of consistently back and forth. You sort of can see that Ferrari favors Leclerc a little bit, and obviously this year they're moving away from Sainz, or next year they're moving away from him. And I think McLaren still are sort of favoring Lando typically, but they sort of see him as this veteran guy that, like, oh, you got to help out the team and you got to help out this young driver, as we saw in Hungary. Lando had a clear victory. I mean, he, frankly, I think should have won that race and gave his spot back to Oscar so that Oscar could win the race because, the team told him to. So I think that also is an indication that, like, maybe McLaren doesn't necessarily see Lando as that number one guy. Like, I could never see Red Bull going, hey, Max, we split the tire strategy and Perez was ahead of you at the time. So maybe just let him buy for the win. Like, first of all, Red Bull would never do that. And Max would never fucking give up that position.
Right.
I think same with Lewis, right? Like, at least in the Bottas era, and I don't even think now with Russell on that team, would Mercedes ever even consider saying, hey, let George buy? And Hamilton would never let George buy. I think, McLaren needs to figure that out. I think having a number one driver is actually very important. I think it sort of hinders teams. Once they get close, it hinders teams to not have that number one guy.
I mean, we love it. We love it when they're fighting. But yeah, the teams can't have that. It's just too much turmoil. You just can't have it. So I'm with you. I mean, I'm almost wondering if we're going to have like the way we had Max and Ricciardo, where they hit, and then Ricciardo's off the team. It's sort of like, hey, guess what? You thought you might not be the number one. You're right. You're not the number one. And will we have that similar with Oscar and Lando? Oh, I'm not sure why this just popped into my head, but so Yuki's been having a pretty good season. And at the Belgian race, he got, what was it? Something like someone added up like a 60 grid penalty or something like that.
Yeah.
He took in so many new parts. And I was like, oh, they should have that for like all sports, Oh, sorry, you've got too many penalties, and so from now on, your field goal kicks have to be 90 yards, for the rest of the game. If it's baseball, yeah, you guys have so many penalties. The opponent now gets 4 strikes for the rest of the game. I mean, just it's funny these rules. We sort of forget them, the ridiculousness of them.
Well, it's funny almost because it sort of doesn't matter, right? Like once you go beyond 20, it really has no effect, right? Grid places, I guess I should say. So, had he gotten 20, it would have been exactly the same as getting, 60. So from their perspective, Yuki's perspective and RB's perspective is like, well, fucking improve as many parts as we can.
Right.
It doesn't really matter. So they tried to make that car the best they could. Yuki didn't make up a whole lot of time and ended pretty far out of the points, but at least they got a point with Daniel. So I don't know, keeping up ahead of those bottom teams, which I'm a little bit surprised by with RB this year. I think they've had a surprisingly decent season, all things considered, especially when you look at last year and how poor they were.
I mean, Yuki and Ricciardo's still good. He's not his former self, but he's a solid driver, and Yuki's good. I always think they should do better, but that's a poorer car than I think it should be. Like you said, maybe better than last year, but anyway, I just pulled up the results again, and I just thought that was funny. Yuki with his, 400 grid penalty. I'm joking. I think it was 60, but it's kind of ridiculous. So, Belgian Grand Prix 2024, good race. Give me your top 5 drivers for the race, Patrick.
All right, top 5. I loved the way George raced. I think he did really well in qualifying, out-qualified by Lewis, but he held on to those tires for so long, still had the pace at the end, didn't give up that spot to Lewis as, I think everybody sort of thought he was going to, and he was just going to try to hold off Oscar. But he said, you know what? I'm going to go take this win. And I think was hard done by a DQ. I mean, rules are the rules, and his car was underweight, but I'm not sure that George really had any control over that. So I'm going to say he was my driver of the day, of the weekend. Thought he did really, really well.
Same.
And then I got to give props to Lewis after that. I think he was extremely good, fastest, 2-stop driver. Got by Sergio at the start of the race where Perez, tried to cut him off. Didn't let it happen. Honestly, I think avoided a collision at the start of that race. Perez came over so hot trying to cut him off, and Lewis reacted well and stayed away from him, and then was still able to battle him down into Eau Rouge and eventually got by him. Got by Leclerc later on and sort of held that top spot until, Russell just decided to go long and one stop it. But other than that, Hamilton was great this weekend.
Oh, yeah. He was so good. Lewis Hamilton 2024, it's not the Lewis Hamilton of, say, 2020. Physically, he's maybe lost a little bit. The mental focus, maybe a little bit less in these, in races where it's tenths of a second that matters. But man, you still see the talent. He's just so good. And so this was another great race. So actually, even though I think there are legit questions behind his move to Ferrari, and I do wonder if he has regrets because he's seeing how good the Mercedes is getting again, it'll be fun to see him in Ferrari.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that. Hopefully Ferrari has a little something up their sleeve for next season to give Leclerc and Hamilton a real fighting shot at both the Constructors and Drivers' Championships. That'll be fun to see. Then, the other guy that was sort of vying for that top spot on the podium, coming down towards the end of the race, I have Oscar Piastri. Just great racing from him. Outqualified his teammate. Was really the only guy that was hanging with those Mercedes cars. Just really solid race from a young driver. I think he's really starting to come into his own and prove himself as an F1 driver. then I've got to say, I really liked the way Max Verstappen raced this weekend. He was fastest in qualifying, had that 10th place grid penalty, so he started 11th, but made his way through the field, just kept a cool head. Previous race in Hungary, he was sort of all over the place, completely unfocused. I think this weekend was totally different. He was in the zone. That car is, last year, a couple years ago, he would have won this race easily with how good the Red Bull car was. He had to really work for it in this race, and he did a really good job. I mean, he got through his teammate, he got through the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz, held off Lando in the McLaren. I mean, finished top 5, ended up being promoted to P4. He was pretty close to a podium position after the disqualification.
Yep.
That's an impressive race from him. And then lastly, I am going to go with, I really liked Charles Leclerc, but I'm going to say Daniel Ricciardo did a really nice job in that RB, getting up into the points. He started well outside of the top 10 and ended up finding a way to get points for that team. So really good job from him.
Awesome. So Belgian Grand Prix 2024, you got George Russell, Lewis Hamilton, Oscar Piastri, Max Verstappen, Daniel Ricciardo. All right, switching to the soft compound. Mario Andretti, the legend, he liked my tweet. So I started a Twitter account so I could like 2 things that I like, F1 clips and Beatles clips. But I saw folks building up grand conspiracy theories, which Twitter, that's what it's there for, I understand, over why Red Bull was losing another key staff member who was leaving to become Audi, which currently this year is Sauber, Audi's team principal. And everyone was, saying, hey, this shows you all the turmoil inside Red Bull, all the chaos inside Red Bull. Look, there may be, but this is Christian Horner's team. Now, he built this team and he takes pride in it and he runs it and he believes it is his team. Now, unlike, say, Toto Wolff at Mercedes, he doesn't have partial ownership. And I'm sure that kills him because Toto's now a billionaire thanks to his ownership stake. And Christian Horner's still an employee, a very well-paid employee, but employee nonetheless. But it's his team. I don't see any conspiracy here. I see only good here. What's happening is, especially with the cost cap, you can't pay everyone as much as you'd like or as much as they may think they deserve. And so you're going to have good people leave. To me, this is a good thing. Seeing good people like, oh, there's an opportunity here. There's an opportunity at Audi. There's an opportunity for me to go to Williams. And what I suggested is this is just simply more evidence that we need another team. There are simply too many good people who can be running an F1 team, be part of an F1 team, and be driving for an F1 team. And so not surprising Mario Andretti like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of talent in the world and a lot of talent that wants to focus and work on these teams and work in F1. And, as drivers, crew members, pit crew members, engineers, this guy, Jonathan Wheatley, was the sporting director at Red Bull Racing, now going to Audi to become the team principal. I mean, running teams, advising teams and engineers, Adrian Newey has been at Red Bull for such a long time, and it continues to look likely that he will become an advisor on a new team. We're not quite sure yet. I mean, he said he's leaving Red Bull, but we don't know if he's going to go somewhere else. I agree. There's a lot of really talented people, a lot of really smart people and capable people, and there's just not really enough positions available it's just such a competitive field and competitive sport. And I think it would be great if there were more opportunities. So adding another team would be awesome to see.
Yep. Now, I do have a conspiracy theory. Because sort of like the NFL and Major League Baseball that over the last generation have added teams, F1 refuses to add teams. And the reason we are told is clear. It's because the owners look at the accounting statement and it's like, hey, my 1/10 share is more than if it was a 1/11th share. And so the only way that number changes in their favor is if the pie grows so much that 1/11th of this new pie is more than the 1/10 of the current pie. But I think that's wrong. In my view, I think the evidence is clear that we now can grow this sport at least one more team, maybe even two, and the sport will grow disproportionately more. So the current 10 owners will get an even bigger chunk of revenue. I still think, and this is my conspiracy theory, that they're looking at the numbers and like, yeah, an 11th team grows the pie, but not quite enough for me to lose some possible control. Because if we add another team, it's probably going to be those damn Americans. That's my theory.
Yeah, I think that's a fair theory, and I believe that.
I mean, Gene Haas got in when the sport was a little, not desperate, but when the sport was well down, and he doesn't run an American team. He's an American, but they got offices in England, offices in Italy. They use an Italian engine. They got a bunch of French people working there. I mean, it's not an American team.
Yeah, that's true. And he got in, right? I mean, there were teams that were essentially going bankrupt, right? I mean, Lotus had to leave the sport, and that's what really opened the door. Otherwise, you're going to have 9 teams on the grid. So F1 was basically like, oh shit, we need another team. Oh, hey, this one guy is going to put up $200 million or whatever it was to get in. Now, they're like, oh, paying us $1 billion to get in? F you.
Right.
And I was like, what are you talking about?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyways, we can go on and on about how fucking annoying this is. But
my conspiracy theory. Now, speaking of all these Europeans, in Paris is the Olympics. And I've been watching some of it. And I even saw a sport that I could do. Not well, but I could do it, which is shot put. I'm like, yeah, I could do that. And maybe golf. So I could shot put and maybe golf. Not well, but those are 2 sports I could actually do. But I saw everyone talking about this Turkish fellow. There's apparently some gun sports, which I did not know. And he basically just shows up. You got all these guys who spend their lives on the shooting sport, just like the swimmers spend their whole life swimming and the soccer people spend their whole life soccering. And this dude just shows up without any equipment. They hand him a gun. I'm like, that's fucking Alonso. That's like Alonso walking in somewhere. Here's the keys of the car. And he's like, yeah, I got this, and he's going to silver. So I don't know if you saw this Turkish dude, but he was a pretty badass dude.
Yeah. Hand in the pocket, straight arm, staring down at a tiny little target and shooting. Yeah, he was pretty cool. Pretty cool guy.
It was. Now, okay. All right. So back to F1.
I'm surprised he didn't have a cigarette in his other hand. But
that would be awesome. That would be awesome.
Maybe that's how he practices, but they probably don't allow it in official competition.
It's funny how when you get to be my age, how fast things seem to be changed. I was watching Pulp Fiction recently, and every couple of years I'll watch Pulp Fiction, and I'm like, damn, they are smoking in every restaurant they go into, in the Jack Slim, and the diner, and everybody's smoking. I'm like, oh, I remember that. I can remember we were all smoking in the restaurants, and now you can't. So it's just weird. Anyway, let's get back to F1, Patrick. So the big F1 news since Belgian Grand Prix is not that Red Bull's losing one of their top guys. It's that Carlos Sainz has actually signed with a team. He has signed with Williams. I think a lot of people are surprised by this. I want to get your thoughts, because a lot of people are saying, man, how do you do that? How do you go from Ferrari to Williams, the glamour team to the bottom dweller? But it's like, look, if you're Carlos Sainz, he didn't go from Ferrari to Williams. Carlos Sainz has no seat next year. They've signed Lewis Hamilton, Ferrari has. So he went from not having an F1 seat to a long-term contract with Williams, an ascending Williams. I think that's not a bad deal.
Well, I'll say this. Williams is shit and they will be shit. So I can understand people in a lot of perspectives saying, oh man, that's a horrible career move. But you already mentioned it earlier. Liam Lawson doesn't have a seat. You know what happens when you don't have a seat? You don't have a fucking F1 seat. You are on the outside. And when you're on the outside, that's bad. So Sainz, I'm sure his agent was talking to Red Bull, was talking to Mercedes, probably even talking to Audi. I mean, he didn't have a seat and he needed to have a seat. Otherwise, it's very possible that he doesn't race in F1 again.
Yeah.
And through no fault of his own, he's a very good driver. He's one of the top drivers on the grid right now. Unfortunately for him, that Williams seat is one of the least desirable seats, I think, that he can have. One, Williams is a bad team. They are not fast. I do not believe they will be fast compared to all these other teams for many, many years. They are realistically not making any major changes, right? At least the Sauber team has Audi coming in. You can expect them, maybe they won't be fast, but at least it'll be a change. At least something will happen. At Williams, I'm looking at the prospects and I'm saying, this looks like it's going to be the same thing as it has been for the last 5, 6, 7 years. Just mediocrity. And then pair that with Alex Albon, your driving teammate. He's been excellent at Williams. And you're going to come in to that team and the best you can do is beat Alex Albon for 1 point. I mean, that's tough. Like, you got to race against a guy who's comfortable and confident and he races really well. He's one of, the hardest teammates, I think, that you got to come into. And you're on a bad team. Like, this is, probably the least desirable seat in F1 right now, but it is a seat.
So I have to disagree with you here because Ferrari saw an opportunity and signed Lewis Hamilton. I can understand why they did it. They want Lewis to sell cars. I know people are going to get upset with that. Look, Lewis is a great driver. I think his days of competing for a driver's championship, they're not behind him, but they're unlikely. He's there to sell cars. So Sainz is out. He's out of a seat. With Williams, he's getting, I think from what we've been led to believe, at least 2 years, maybe more. And so that's a seat in F1, like we were talking about Liam Lawson. I mean, this is a great kid, great driver. He's proven himself, still no seat. And yes, Williams is a bottom dweller. And yes, they will be for at least a few more years. But let's look at the other teams. Sauber, which becomes Audi. Maybe a few years from now when Audi, and they keep hiring and firing people already, and they're not even in F1 yet, they'll have things worked out. But that's, let's say, 2-3 years away. Let's look next at Haas. Haas is doing very well. They've got a decent car, but the team is hobbled together, and Gene Haas woefully underspends. Carlos Sainz is coming from Ferrari. He wants that private jet lifestyle. He does not want the flying coach lifestyle that Haas gives you. Who next? Racing Bulls? I think the problem if you're Carlos Sainz and Racing Bulls, that's like, there's still the view, it's like, oh, you went from Ferrari to the Red Bull sister team, which is really the Red Bull junior team, And then Alpine is just imploding. So I think if Mercedes turned him down and Red Bull turned him down and Alonso was staying at Aston, I think Williams was the best of those options.
Right. I agree. And my assumption is that exactly that happened. Red Bull and Mercedes turned him down. And so, he was able to sign with an F1 team. He will be racing in F1 for a historic team in Williams. But that is a tough situation to come into, I think. So that's sort of my perspective, is like he really has his work cut out for him next season and beyond at Williams. Whereas, he was just sort of flying free at Ferrari, and I think would have really, really done well at Mercedes if they had given him a seat. Quite frankly, I don't know why the hell Mercedes wouldn't give him a seat. Like, I know they want Antonelli, or they want to, F with Red Bull and say, oh, Max is going to come here. But when you have a driver of Sainz caliber that you can sign and know pretty much immediately he's going to come in and you're going to have a really solid driver lineup, I don't know why they wouldn't take that option.
I would have taken Sainz at Mercedes. I think Toto's a loyal guy. I still think what Lewis did in going to Ferrari, I still think that stings. Toto's really into loyalty. I suspect he's made promises like to the young Kimi Antonelli and even others, combined with the fact that my assumption is Carlos Sainz was holding fast to a multi-year deal, minimum 2 and likely even 3. And he got that at Williams. So, I think that was tough. If I was Red Bull, I might have signed him, but because, that would have been a good spot for him as well. So who will be at Mercedes next year, do you think? You think it will be Antonelli or?
I assume it will be. I mean, I don't see any other reason why they would not have signed somebody yet. I don't see a reason for it. I pretty much would have assumed, actually now, one of the 2 Williams drivers would have signed there, either Albon or Sainz, but both of them decided to sign multi-year deals with Williams. So I guess now it sort of does come down to Kimi Antonelli, unless they're gonna, go out on a limb and sign a Liam Lawson or somebody like that.
Yeah, I don't think Liam Lawson, though I do like him. I really hope he's racing, alongside Max next year. We'll see. Who knows? A team that we haven't talked much about is Alpine. And speaking of driver changes, I believe they have announced who will replace Ocon for next year, and that is the Aussie Jack Doohan. And I was very happy that they signed him. Firstly, because the man has an absolutely beautiful head of hair, which I admire. He's an Aussie, seems like a fun guy. All the Aussies seem fun. But, he's a reserve driver. And it just seems like those guys always, it's like, oh, I'm a reserve driver. I'm kind of next in line. Anything happens, I get that seat. And it never works out that way. How long was Stoffel Van Dorn a reserve driver? Fittipaldi. It's not happening, guys. Sorry. So I was very happy for him.
Yeah, I think that's a good signing. I think he's young and he's proven that he's a very good driver in F2, and he's been with the team for a long time. So it's exciting to see some of these young guys come in especially to teams that hopefully will do well. I'm not sure that Alpine will figure it out for next season. Hopefully they have a decent car coming into next season and at least somewhat competitive, unlike this year. But it's really hard to see really talented young drivers come in to teams that are just woeful. I mean, we saw that happen with Haas. I mean, bringing in a guy like Mick Schumacher, and that car was just so terrible that you almost never really got a sense of how talented or good he even was. Same thing at Williams. I mean, luckily for George Russell, he ended up being able to drive pretty well, and I think he already sort of made a name for himself in F2 and was in kind of the Mercedes eye and was able to get over to Mercedes eventually. But it is good to see young guys, reserve drivers, get a chance in F1, and hopefully he seizes that opportunity and does really well next year.
Across the Line, our segment where we predict the winner of the next race. The winner of the next race will be unknown for about a month. We're in summer break. The next race will be in a few weeks in the Netherlands. Oh, Let me explain. So we choose the top 5. If we get a driver in the top 5 correctly, we get a point. If we get him in the exact right spot, we get 3 points. Once one of us chooses a driver, he is off the board. Patrick, what are the current standings of Across the Line?
Yeah, well, coming into this week, I had a nice little lead on you, 46 points to 33. And I actually tried to help you out a little bit this week. But regardless of the disqualification, we each scored the same number of points. So the actual top 5 after the disqualification was Hamilton, Piastri, Leclerc, Verstappen, Norris. You got a total of 1 point. You had Verstappen, Perez, Sainz, Alonso, Tsunoda. So 1 point for Max.
Oof.
I had a nice 6 points in this week. I had Hamilton, Norris, Russell, Leclerc, Piastri. So 3 for Hamilton, 1 each for Lando, Leclerc, and Oscar. So current standings after Belgium are 52 points for me to 34 points for you.
Dang.
I kind of have a nice little max lead right now.
You do. I'm like, it had been sort of like McLaren. I was like, I still had a chance, but now like, I don't know. I'm like Ferrari. All right. Who picks for Netherlands? Who goes first?
You have first pick.
Okay. It's the Netherlands. It's coming after the break. I'm going with Max. That's an easy one.
Oh boy. You know what? I gotta say Mercedes has come on strong. I really like that car, that team right now. I'm gonna take Lewis again. Maybe 3 wins in 4 races.
Yep.
And then I will go same 1-2 as this past week, at least in my picks. I'm gonna take Norris P2. Hamilton Norris.
Lewis and Lando, nice. Then I'm gonna take the counters. I'm gonna take George in P2, Oscar in P3.
Nice. Let me see. Then I'm gonna say Leclerc gets on that podium again. He's been driving well, but that Ferrari, I think, now is probably the 4th best car on the grid. But he's been doing okay. Then I'm going to take Perez. Maybe he just needs a reset, and maybe this break will give him that, and he'll start driving up to his potential again.
I think that's actually going to be the case because I was going to pick Perez next. So then I will take, again, I'll counter that. I'm going to take Carlos Sainz in 4th. And in 5th, I'm going to take Nico Hülkenberg. Nico's the man.
Ooh.
Let's see what he can do.
Nice. I am going to take a weird one. I'm going to take Lance Stroll, P5.
That is a weird one. Last of the daddy drivers.
Yeah.
So I've got Max. This is for Netherlands in a month. Max, George, Oscar, Carlos, and Nico. You have Lewis, Lando, Charles Leclerc, Sergio Perez, and Lance Stroll. Awesome. Any crazy predictions, Patrick?
My crazy prediction is not that crazy. I think Lewis Hamilton will finish the season P2 in the Drivers' Championship ahead of Lando, Leclerc, all those guys.
Wow.
Yeah. Only Verstappen ahead of him.
He's got the talent now. He's got a car. He's got a car again. Ooh, that's a good one. Mine is slightly crazy because Red Bull has said, nope, we're keeping Sergio. Mine is, they're not. That over the next 10 races, he will falter enough to where they're like, look, this is for everybody's benefit, not just Red Bull's, but Sergio's as well. He's floundering, he's flailing, he's drowning, and they're going to put someone else in, and I expect it'll be Liam.
Ooh, that is interesting.
All right. I want to thank you all for listening to everybody's most beloved father and son F1 podcast. Remember to subscribe, leave a review, and tell a friend. See, we give you work on this show. And we are lights out.
See ya. Thanks for listening.
You just finished listening to Hard Compound, recorded in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and around the world.